Hi, it's V. Before we begin tonight's episode, dear listeners, let's talk about mental health. Getting a good night's sleep puts you in the right frame of mind to deal with life's challenges. But what about when your challenges are impacting your ability to enjoy your daily life? This is where BetterHelp online counseling comes to the rescue. You can now get help on your own time and at your own pace. Schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus chat and text with your therapist. Best of all, it's a truly affordable option. You get unlimited communication with your therapist for about the cost of the insurance copays if you were going to multiple weekly appointments. Snoozecast listeners get 10% off your first month with discount code Snoozecast. And if you sign up through our link, you're also helping support the hard work that goes into making our show. So why not get started tonight? Press pause or make a reminder to check it out tomorrow. Go to betterhelp.com/snoozecast. Now, on to our show. Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on social media and wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoy our show, please write us a review on the podcast app. Also, share us with a friend. We'd like to thank our listeners. While you get tucked into bed, know that every night, thousands of Snoozecast listeners are tucking in as well, including in Spain, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia. May you all have pleasant dreams. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters and by Showy Foliage. Tonight, by listener request, we'll read the opening to River Bee by John Burroughs. The section is titled Among the Wildflowers. John Burroughs was an American nature essayist, active in the U.S. conservation movement. Burroughs accompanied many personalities of the time in his later years, including Theodore Roosevelt, Thomas Edison, and Henry Ford, who gave him an automobile. According to Ford, John Burroughs, Edison, and I made several vagabond trips together. We went in motor caravans and slept under canvas. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. Among the wildflowers. 1. Nearly every season, I make the acquaintance of one or more new flowers. It takes years to exhaust the botanical treasures of any one considerable neighborhood, unless one makes a dead set at it, like an herbalist. One likes to have his floral acquaintances come to him easily and naturally, like his other friends. Some pleasant occasion should bring you together. You meet in a walk, or touch elbows on a picnic under a tree, or get acquainted on a fishing or camping out expedition. What comes to you in the way of birds or flowers, while wooing only the large spirit of open-air nature, seems like special good fortune. At any rate, one does not want to bolt his botany, but rather to prolong the course. One likes to have something in reserve, something to be on the lookout for on his walks. I have never yet found the orchid called Calypso, a large, variegated purple and yellow flower, Gray says, which grows in cold, wet woods and bogs. Very beautiful and very rare. Calypso, you know, was the nymph who fell in love with Ulysses and detained him 7 years upon her island, and died of a broken heart after he left her. I have a keen desire to see her in her floral guise, reigning over some silent bog, or rising above the moss of some dark glen in the woods, and would gladly be the Ulysses to be detained at least a few hours by her. I will describe her by the aid of Gray, so that if any of my readers come across her, they may know what a rarity they have found. She may be looked for in cold, mossy, boggy places in our northern woods. You will see a low flower, somewhat like a lady's slipper, that is, with an inflated sac-shaped lip. The petals and sepals much alike, rising and spreading. The color mingled purple and yellow. The stem, or scape, from 3 to 5 inches high, with but one leaf, that one thin and slightly heart-shaped, with a stem which starts from a solid bulb. That is the nymph of our boggy solitudes, waiting to break her heart for any adventurous hero who may penetrate her domain. Several of our harmless little wildflowers have been absurdly named out of the old mythologies. Thus, Indian cucumber root, one of Thoreau's favorite flowers, is named after the sorceress Medea and is called Mediola because it was at one time thought to possess rare medicinal properties, and medicine and sorcery have always been more or less confounded in the opinion of mankind. It's a pretty and strangely decorative sort of plant, with, when perfect, 2 stages or platforms of leaves, one above the other. You see a whorl of 5 or 6 leaves, a foot or more from the ground, which seems to bear a standard with another whorl of 3 leaves at the top of it. The small, colorless, recurved flowers shoot out from above this top whorl. The whole expression of the plant is singularly slender and graceful. Sometimes, probably the first year, it only attains to the first circle of leaves. This is the platform from which it will rear its flower column the next year. Its white tuberous root is crisp and tender, and leaves in the mouth distinctly the taste of cucumber. Whether or not the Indians used it as a relish as we do the cucumber, I do not know. Still another pretty flower that perpetuates the name of a Grecian nymph, a flower that was a new find to me a few years ago, is the Arethusa. Arethusa was one of the nymphs who attended Diana, and was by that goddess turned into a fountain, that she might escape the god of the river, Alpheus, who became desperately in love with her on seeing her at her bath. Our Arethusa is one of the prettiest of the orchids, and has been pursued through many a marsh and quaking bog by her lovers. She is a bright, pink-purple flower an inch or more long, with the odor of sweet violets. The sepals and petals rise up and arch over the column, which we may call the heart of the flower, as if shielding it. In Plymouth County, Massachusetts, where the Arethusa seems common, I have heard it called Indian pink. But I was going to recount my new finds. One sprang up in the footsteps of that destroying angel, dynamite. A new railroad cut across my tramping ground, with its hordes of Italian laborers and its mountains of giant powder, etc., was enough to banish all the gentler deities forever from the place. But it did not. Scarcely had the earthquake passed when, walking at the base of a rocky cliff that had been partly blown away in the search for stone for two huge abutments that stood nearby, I beheld the debris at the base of the cliff draped and festooned by one of our most beautiful foliage plants, and one I had long been on the lookout for, namely, the climbing fumitory. It was growing everywhere in the greatest profusion, affording, by its tenderness, delicacy, and grace, the most striking contrast to the destruction the black giant had wrought. The power that had smote the rock seemed to have called it into being. Probably the seeds had lain dormant in cracks and crevices for years, and when the catastrophe came, they found themselves in new soil amid the wreck of the old order of things. They sprang into new life, and grew as if the world had been created anew for them, as in a sense it had. Certainly, they grew more luxuriantly, and never was the ruin wrought by powder veiled by more delicate, lace-like foliage. The panicles of drooping, pale, flesh-colored flowers heightened the effect of the whole. This plant is a regular climber. It has no extra appendages for that purpose, and does not wind, but climbs by means of its young leaf stalks, which lay hold like tiny hands or hooks. The end of every branch is armed with a multitude of these baby hands. The flowers are pendant and swing like ear jewels. They are slightly heart-shaped, and when examined closely, look like little pockets made of crumpled silk, nearly white on the inside or underside, and pale purple on the side toward the light, and shirred up at the bottom. And pockets they are in quite a literal sense, for, though they fade, they do not fall, but become pockets full of seeds. The fumitory is a perpetual bloomer from July till killed by the autumn frosts. Strange to say, the plant did not appear in that locality the next season, and has never appeared since. Perhaps it will take another dynamite earthquake to wake it up. The closely allied species of this plant, the dicentra, Dutchman's breeches and squirrel corn, are much more common and are among our prettiest spring flowers. I have an eye out for the white hearts, related to the bleeding hearts of the gardens, and absurdly called Dutchman's breeches, the last week in April. It's a rock-loving plant, and springs upon the shelves of the ledges, or in the debris at their base, as if by magic. As soon as bloodroot has begun to star the waste, stony places, and the first swallow has been heard in the sky, we are on the lookout for dicentra. The more northern species, called squirrel corn, from the small golden tubers at its root, blooms in May and has the fragrance of hyacinths. It does not affect the rocks like all the other flowers of this family. My second new acquaintance the same season was the showy lady slipper. Most of the floral ladies leave their slippers in swampy places in the woods. Only the stemless one leaves hers on dry ground before she reaches the swamp, commonly under evergreen trees, where the carpet of pine needles will not hurt her feet. But one may penetrate many wet, mucky places in the woods before he finds the prettiest of them all, the showy lady slipper, the prettiest slipper, but the stoutest and coarsest plant, the flower large and very showy, white, tinged with purple in front, the stem 2 feet high, very leafy, and coarser than bare weed. Report had come to me through my botanizing neighbor that in a certain quaking sphagnum bog in the woods the showy lady slipper could be found. The locality proved to be the marrowy grave of an extinct lake or black tarn. On the borders of it, the white azalea was in bloom, fast fading. In the midst of it were spruces and black ash and giant ferns, and low in the spongy, mossy bottom, the pitcher plant. The lady slipper grew in little groups and companies all about. Never have I beheld a prettier sight, so gay, so festive, so holiday-looking. Were there so many gay bonnets rising above the foliage, or were they flocks of white doves with purple-stained breasts just lifting up their wings to take flight? Or were they little fleets of ferry boats with sail set, tossing on a mimic sea of wild, weedy growths? Such images throng the mind on recalling the scene, and only faintly hint its beauty and animation. The long, erect white sepals do much to give the alert, tossing look which the flower wears. The dim light, too, of its secluded haunts and its snowy purity and freshness contribute to the impression it makes. The purple tinge is like a stain of wine which has slightly overflowed the brim of the inflated lip or sac and run part way down its snowy sides. This lady slipper is one of the rarest and choicest of our wild flowers, and its haunts and its beauty are known only to the few. Those who have the secret guard it closely, lest their favorite be exterminated. A well-known botanist in one of the large New England cities told me that it was found in but one place in that neighborhood, and that the secret, so far as he knew, was known to but 3 persons and was carefully kept by them. A friend of mine, an enthusiast on orchids, came one June day a long way by rail to see this flower. I conducted him to the edge of the swamp, lifted up the branches as I would a curtain, and said, "There they are." "Where?" said he, peering far into the dim recesses. "Within 6 feet of you," I replied. He narrowed his vision, and such an expression of surprise and delight as came over his face. A group of a dozen or more of the plants, some of them twin-flowered, were there, almost within reach, the first he had ever seen, and his appreciation of the scene, visible in every look and gesture, was greatly satisfying. In the fall he came and moved a few of the plants to a tamarack swamp in his own vicinity, where they throve and bloomed finely for a few years, and then, for some unknown reason, failed. Nearly every June, my friend still comes to feast his eyes upon this queen of the cypripediums. While returning from my first search for the lady slipper, my hat fairly brushed the nest of the red-eyed vireo, which was so cunningly concealed, such an open secret, in the dim, leafless underwoods, that I could but pause and regard it. It was suspended from the end of a small, curving sapling, was flecked here and there by some whitish substance, so as to blend it with the gray mottled boles of the tree, and, in the dimly lighted ground floor of the woods, was sure to escape any but the most prolonged scrutiny. A couple of large leaves formed a canopy above it. It was not so much hidden as it was rendered invisible by texture and position with reference to light and shade. A few summers ago, I struck a new and beautiful plant in the shape of a weed that had only recently appeared in that part of the country. I was walking through an August meadow when I saw, on a little knoll, a bit of most vivid orange, verging on a crimson. I knew of no flower of such a complexion frequenting such a place as that. On investigation, it proved to be a stranger. It had a rough, hairy, leafless stem about 1 foot high, surmounted by a corymbose cluster of flowers or flower heads of dark, vivid orange color. The leaves were deeply notched and toothed, very bristly, and were pressed flat to the ground. It seemed to lay hold upon the ground as if it was not going to let go easily. And what a fiery plume it had! The next day, in another field a mile away, I chanced upon more of the flowers. On making inquiry, I found that a small patch or colony of the plants had appeared that season, or first been noticed then, in a meadow well known to me from boyhood. They had been cut down with the grass in early July, and the first week in August had shot up and bloomed again. I found the spot aflame with them. Their leaves covered every inch of the surface where they stood, and not a spear of grass grew there. They were taking slow but complete possession. They were devouring the meadow by inches. The plant seemed to be hawkweed, or some closely allied species of the family, but I could not find it mentioned in our botanies. A few days later, on the edge of an adjoining county 10 miles distant, I found, probably, its headquarters. It had appeared there a few years before and was thought to have escaped from some farmer's dooryard. Patches of it were appearing here and there in the fields, and the farmers were thoroughly alive to the danger and were fighting it like fire. Its seeds are winged like those of the dandelion, and it sows itself far and near. It would be a beautiful acquisition to our midsummer fields, supplying a tint as brilliant as that given by the scarlet poppies to English grain fields. But it would be an expensive one, as it usurps the land completely. This observation was made 10 years ago. I have since learned that the plant is from Europe, a kind of hawkweed. It is fast becoming a common weed in New York and New England. Parts of New England have already a midsummer flower nearly as brilliant, and probably far less aggressive and noxious, in meadow beauty or rexia, the sole northern genus of a family of tropical plants. I found it very abundant in August in the country bordering on Buzzards Bay. It was a new flower to me, and I was puzzled to make it out. It seemed like some sort of scarlet evening primrose. The parts were in fours, the petals slightly heart-shaped and convoluted in the bud, the leaves bristly, the calyx tube prolonged, but the stem was square, the leaves opposite, and the tube urn-shaped. The flowers were an inch across and bright purple. It grew in large patches in dry, sandy fields, making the desert gay with color, and also on the edges of marshy places. It eclipses any flower of the open fields known to me farther inland. When we come to improve our wild garden, as recommended by Mr. Robinson in his book on wild gardening, we must not forget the rexia. Our seacoast flowers are probably more brilliant in color than the same flowers in the interior. I thought the wild rose on the Massachusetts coast deeper tinted and more fragrant than those I was used to. The steeple bush or hardhack had more color, as had the rose and several other plants. But when vivid color is wanted, what can surpass or equal our cardinal flower? There is a glow about this flower, as if color emanated from it, as from a live coal. The eye is baffled, and does not seem to reach the surface of the petal. It does not see the texture or material part as it does in other flowers, but rests in a steady, still radiance. It is not so much something colored as it is color itself. And then the moist, cool, shady places it affects, usually where it has no floral rivals, and where the large, dark shadows need just a dab of fire. Often, too, we see it double, its reflected image in some dark pool, heightening its effect. I have never found it with its only rival in color, the monarda, or bee balm, a species of mint. Farther north, the cardinal flower seems to fail, and the monarda takes its place, growing in similar localities. One may see it about a mountain spring, or along a meadow brook, or glowing in the shade around the head of a wild mountain lake. It stands up 2 feet high or more, and the flowers show like a broad scarlet cap. The only thing I have seen in this country that calls to mind the green, green fields of Britain splashed with scarlet poppies, may be witnessed in August in the marshes of the lower Hudson, where the broad, sedgy and flaggy spaces are sprinkled with the great marshmallow. It is a most pleasing spectacle. Level stretches of dark green flag or waving marsh grass, kindled on every square yard by these bright pink blossoms, like great burning coals fanned in the breeze. The mallow is not so deeply colored as the poppy, but it is much larger and has the tint of youth and happiness. It's an immigrant from Europe, but it is making itself thoroughly at home in our great river meadows. The same day your eye is attracted by the mallows, as your train skirts or cuts through the broad marshes, it will revel with delight in the masses of fresh, bright color afforded by the purple loosestrife, which grows in similar localities and shows here and there like purple bonfires. It's a tall plant, grows in dense masses, and affords a most striking border to the broad spaces dotted with the mallow. It too came to us from overseas and first appeared along the Wallkill many years ago. It used to be thought by the farmers in that vicinity that its seed was first brought in wool imported to this country from Australia and washed in the Wallkill at Walden, where there was a woolen factory.